What if I told you that the reason you are completely exhausted by 2 p.m. on a Tuesday has almost nothing to do with how much work you've actually done?
Right.
And it has everything to do with a lie. Your brain told your body the literal second you woke up.
I mean, I know it sounds like a massive exaggeration, but from a strictly neurological standpoint, it is entirely accurate.
Yeah.
Because fatigue, your brain fog, even that sudden drop in motivation you get right after lunch, these are very often manufactured biological realities.
Wait, manufactured?
Yeah, manufactured based on a psychological assumption that you made before you even got out of bed. We tend to view our daily energy as this battery that just slowly drains based on the tasks we do.
Right, like a phone battery or something.
Exactly. But the reality is that your brain is actively predicting how stressful the day will be. And it physically prepares your body for that fabricated stress by, dumping cortisol and creating all this friction where none actually existed.
Man, that just completely reframes the entire concept of a morning routine.
It really does.
Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission for you today is singular, but it's massive. We are going to fundamentally restructure your daily routine by looking at the invisible psychological forces that dictate your energy and, your interactions.
Because surface-level hacks just do not survive contact with reality.
Exactly.
So you can download the most sophisticated productivity app on the market, but if you haven't addressed the underlying behavioral programming, you will just find more efficient ways to procrastinate.
Right. By the end of our time today, we are going to extract a powerful step-by-step checklist for peak productivity and masterful social navigation. We aren't giving you superficial life hacks today, no color coding your calendar or waking up at 4 a.m. We have to look at the operating system running beneath all those apps.
And that operating system is the human mind.
Yes, and we've brought a massive stack of psychological source material to the table today to figure it out. We're synthesizing Stephen Covey's classic behavioral frameworks from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and we're crossing that with 18 psychological truths from the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche on how to accurately read the people around you.
Which is such a fascinating combination.
It is. And we're also integrating modern behavioral science regarding the brain's filtering mechanisms, specifically this thing called the reticular activating system.
Yes, yeah.
And cognitive biases. We're also pulling clinical insights into childhood trauma, looking at a developmental concept called parentification, and then topping it all off with interpersonal tactics pulled straight from forensic psychology and criminal interrogations.
Which sounds intense, but the through line connecting this massive stack of research is just the search for causality. We want to understand the why.
Right, the root cause.
Yeah, why do we fail to connect with our coworkers? Why do we self-sabotage our own task lists? And, more importantly, how does understanding the mechanics of human deception, trauma, and biological focus allow us to radically change our daily reality?
So before you can manage a complex project, and certainly before you can manage the highly unpredictable people around you, you have to manage your own perception of reality.
The inner game always precedes the outer game.
Exactly. So we have to start with Covey's foundational concept of proactivity. And look, the word proactive gets thrown around in corporate synergy meetings so often that it's just been stripped of its actual weight.
Oh, absolutely. It's just a buzzword now.
Right. But Covey's definition isn't about just, sending an email before your boss asks for it. It's deeply psychological. He defines proactivity as recognizing the existence of a gap between a stimulus and your response to that stimulus.
And that gap, that tiny space, is the only place where human freedom actually exists.
Okay, unpack that a little for us.
Well, you cannot control the stimulus. You can't control being born into a tough socioeconomic situation. You can't control a sudden economic downturn that wrecks your entire industry, or dealing with a chronic illness, or just having a highly toxic manager.
Right. Those are completely external stimuli.
Exactly. And Covey's argument is that focusing your emotional energy on those unchangeable factors renders you a passive victim of your environment. What you actually control is the space right after the stimulus hits you.
The response.
Yes, you control your interpretation of the event, your work ethic in response to it, and how you choose to treat the people around you despite all that external pressure.
So it's like you control whether you buckle your seatbelt before you drive, even though you obviously can't control all the other crazy drivers on the road.
That's a perfect analogy.
And the behavioral science backs up this need for internal control with, honestly, terrifying precision. We see this powerfully in the nocebo effect. Now, everyone is familiar with the placebo effect, right?
Sure.
You take a sugar pill, you believe it's a powerful painkiller, and your brain actually releases endorphins to cure your headache. The nocebo effect is like the dark, destructive mirror of that exact mechanism.
It really is. So in a nocebo scenario, the setup is identical, but the expectation is inverted.
Okay, give us an example from the research.
Right. So a doctor gives a patient a completely inert sugar pill, just a blank pill. However, the doctor acts as an authority figure and issues this stern warning. They say, this medication is highly experimental and has severe side effects. You are highly likely to experience intense nausea, vertigo, and a racing heartbeat.
Just planting that seed of expectation.
Exactly. So the patient swallows the pill, which again contains absolutely zero active ingredient.
Right.
And within an hour, they are physically vomiting, their heart rate is spiking, and they literally cannot stand up without feeling dizzy.
Wow.
Their brain literally manufactured a severe physical illness out of nothing but a negative assumption.
That is wild, because the brain doesn't actually distinguish between a perceived threat and a physical one.
No, it doesn't.
So think about this in your daily life. If you wake up, look at your calendar, and passively tell yourself, oh man, today's going to be an absolute disaster, this project is impossible, my boss is going to scream at me, you are basically administering a nocebo to yourself.
You are. Your brain hears that negative assumption, registers it as an impending threat, and begins flooding your entire system with stress hormones.
And so you physically generate the fatigue, the brain fog, the anxiety to make that negative assumption a biological reality before you even open your laptop.
Which is why passivity is a biological trap. If you do not actively program your brain for how you want to perceive the day, your environment will program it for you.
Right.
And it will usually do that with a strong bias toward anxiety and threat detection just because of how we evolved.
So if passivity sets us up for biological failure, how do we actively program the brain for productivity? This brings us to a concept from our sources that, on the surface, sounds a little bit like mystical nonsense.
Yeah. Yes, the law of attraction.
Right. People usually associate this with, like, gurus on mountaintops or vision boards, claiming that if you just think positive thoughts, $1 million will magically manifest in your bank account out of nowhere.
Yeah, and we really need to strip away all that mysticism because the underlying mechanism there is a proven biological function of the brain.
Let's get into the science of it then.
So it centers on a bundle of nerves at our brainstem called the reticular activating system, or the RAS. See, your brain is bombarded with billions of bits of sensory input every single second.
Just a massive amount of data.
Right. The hum of the air conditioner, the feeling of the fabric of your shirt against your skin, the peripheral movement outside your window, thousands of words being spoken around you.
Yeah.
If your conscious mind had to process all of that data simultaneously, you would experience an immediate psychotic break. It's just too much.
So the brain has to have, like, a bouncer at the door of your consciousness.
The RAS is that bouncer. It is a highly sophisticated filtering system. It decides what tiny fraction of information gets through to your conscious awareness and what gets deleted as just irrelevant background noise.
And the criteria the RAS uses to make that decision is whatever you have told it is important.
Exactly.
The research highlights this thing called the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, also known as the frequency illusion, to prove this. So imagine you decide to buy a very specific car, say a silver Honda Civic.
Okay.
Suddenly you start seeing silver Honda Civics everywhere, at every stoplight, in every parking lot. Now, the car factory didn't suddenly pump out thousands of these cars just to stock you.
Right, they were always there.
They were always there. But before you made the decision to buy one, your RAS filtered them out as completely irrelevant noise. The moment you focused your intention, your RAS recategorized that specific car as highly important data, and your brain actively began searching the environment for it.
Which is such a powerful mechanism when you apply it intentionally.
Wait, let me put this in a functional analogy. Tell me if this works. It's exactly like setting the destination in a car's GPS, right?
Yes.
If I get in the car and I don't type in opportunities or solutions or collaborations, the GPS doesn't actually know what to look for. It just drives me in circles past 1,000 incredible exits that I don't even bother to look out the window to see.
That is exactly how it works.
So the law of attraction, viewed through the neuroscience of the RAS, isn't about manifesting things out of thin air while you sit passively on your couch. It's about typing the right destination into the GPS so your brain stops filtering out the resources that are already surrounding you.
Because the opportunity was always hidden in the background noise of your life.
Yeah.
And look, action is still absolutely required. You have to actually drive the car. But a primed RAS ensures you don't drive right past the exit. If you consciously instruct your brain, like, I am looking for ways to streamline my workflow today, your RAS will suddenly flag a passing comment from a coworker or just a random sentence in an article that you otherwise would have ignored, and it will present it to you as a solution.
Which brings us to the very first actionable step in our checklist for you today. Step 1, the proactive prime.
I love this step.
Yeah, so before you check your email, before you look at the news, before you even look at your to-do list, you must consciously decide exactly what you want to focus on to activate your RAS. You type the destination into the GPS.
And simultaneously, you must proactively reject the nocebo effect.
Yes, you have to reject those negative, catastrophic assumptions that will sabotage your biology before the day even begins. You are consciously setting the biological filter for your reality.
And with the brain primed and actively hunting for solutions like that, we then face the physical reality of the workload itself.
The actual execution.
Right. We have to transition from neural programming to execution. How do we physically tackle a massive to-do list without immediately retreating into overwhelm?
This requires crossing Covey's goal-setting frameworks with some pretty harsh truths from behavioral economics. Covey's second and third habits are start with the end in mind and put first things first.
Which sounds simple, but it's tough.
It is. It's a complete rejection of the idea that being busy is the same thing as being productive. Doing irrelevant things very efficiently is still a complete waste of time.
Exactly.
So Covey pushes us to focus on important, non-urgent tasks. The long-term planning, the relationship building, the deep work that actually moves the needle, rather than just putting out daily fires.
But the sheer volume of tasks is where the friction happens for most people.
Yeah.
People freeze because they look at 20 things on a list and they naturally assign them all equal weight.
Right. Everything feels urgent. So we have to introduce the 80-20 principle to break that paralysis.
Also known as the Pareto principle.
Yes, the Pareto principle. This is a mathematical axiom that shows up consistently across almost all human endeavors. The principle basically states that 80% of your results come from just 20% of your causes. It is a fundamental law of unequal distribution.
And the source data illustrates this everywhere. I mean, in economics, 80% of a company's revenue typically stems from just 20% of their most loyal customer base.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And in academics, 80% of the knowledge you actually retain for an exam comes from just 20% of your study techniques. Usually the highly uncomfortable stuff like active recall or flashcards.
Right, while the remaining 80% of your time spent just passively highlighting textbooks yields almost nothing.
Exactly. And even in our personal lives, 80% of our emotional support and fulfillment comes from about 20% of our friendships.
So translated to a daily workload, if you have 10 items on your task list, 2 of them will actually yield 80% of your progress for the week.
But the problem is human nature. We are biologically wired to conserve energy, so we crave cheap dopamine.
Right, we want the easy wins.
Exactly. We want to check off the 8 easy, meaningless tasks first, just to feel the psychological reward of crossing things off the list. We constantly mistake motion for progress.
And we avoid the 20% because the 20% is usually really hard. It requires deep cognitive load.
It does.
But there is another psychological trap hidden in our execution that makes us feel constantly behind, even when we are doing the right work. The sources identify it as the anchoring bias. Let's unpack that.
Yeah, so anchoring is a cognitive bias where our brain determines the value, expectation, or normalcy of something based entirely on the very first piece of information we receive, the anchor.
Okay.
The psychological research uses a brilliant economic example for this. Imagine you grew up in a town where gasoline was always $2 a gallon.
Sounds like a nice town.
Right. So your brain anchors to that price as the baseline reality of what fuel is worth. Now, if you move to a new state and gas is $3.50, your brain registers extreme pain.
Oh yeah, you feel like you are being completely robbed.
Yeah.
It is overwhelmingly expensive.
Exactly. Conversely, if you grew up in a city where gas was always $5 a gallon, and you encountered that exact same $3.50 price tag, your brain registers massive relief.
It feels like a miraculous bargain.
Right. But the intrinsic value of the gasoline didn't change at all.
The only thing that changed was the psychological anchor the person brought to the transaction.
Yes. So if we apply this cognitive bias to our own productivity, How are we anchoring our own expectations of what constitutes a good or productive workday?
Oh, man. We tend to anchor our expectations to our most extreme anomalies, don't
We
we?
absolutely do.
We anchor to the hyper-caffeinated sprint. Like you look back at a day 3 months ago where you had a massive deadline looming. You drank 4 espressos, you skipped lunch, you literally didn't speak to your family, and you churned out a 20-page report in 8 hours, fueled entirely by cortisol and panic.
And tragically, your brain takes that completely unsustainable, unhealthy anomaly and it sets it as your new anchor for daily output.
You've set the gas price at an impossible standard.
Exactly. Now, when you have a normal, sustainable Tuesday where you do solid, focused work for 6 hours, take a walk, and eat a healthy lunch, your brain compares it to the panic sprint anchor and registers the normal day as a total failure.
Wow.
You feel this persistent, nagging guilt that you are falling behind simply because you are comparing a standard day to a crisis mode event.
And that dynamic just destroys the concept of put first things first. You end up running on a treadmill of false expectations, exhausted by a total illusion.
So to fix this, you have to consciously recognize your anchor and intentionally reset it.
You have to define a successful day by the consistency of your focus on the right things, not the sheer volume of output generated by stress. Which brings us to step 2 of our checklist, the 20% target.
Right. Look at your sprawling task list for today. Apply the Pareto principle ruthlessly. Identify the 1 or 2 goals out of 10 that possess the actual leverage, the tasks that will bring the most fulfillment, and actually make the other 8 tasks easier or irrelevant.
And focus your peak cognitive energy there. And as you do, consciously reset your productivity anchor. Reject the expectation that you need to operate at crisis-level capacity to be valuable. Execute on the 20% and accept that it is enough.
So we've optimized the solitary mind, we've primed the brain's filter, and we've ruthlessly prioritized the task list.
But, and this is a big but, none of that solitary productivity matters if your day is immediately derailed by a miscommunication with a coworker or a hostile email from a client or, tension with your partner.
Because productivity does not exist in a vacuum.
Exactly. To truly protect your time and energy, we have to navigate the friction between people. We have to build the social bridge.
And Covey's 5th habit addresses this directly, and I'd argue it is his most difficult imperative. Seek first to understand, then to be understood.
I mean, it sounds like a pleasant platitude, right? It's something you'd see on a motivational poster. But in practice, it is incredibly rare. The source material points out a devastating truth about human communication. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply.
Yeah, while the other person is speaking, we are simply reloading our own arguments, just waiting for them to take a breath so we can fire our perspective right back at them.
So true. Covey actually breaks listening down into 5 distinct levels. We have ignoring, which is obvious,
Yeah.
then pretending to listen, which we do because actual listening requires a heavy cognitive load we often just don't want to expend.
Right.
Then selective listening, attentive listening, and finally, empathic listening. And empathic listening is a complete paradigm shift.
It really is. It is stepping outside your own autobiography and getting inside the other person's frame of reference. You attempt to see the world the exact way they see it, feeling the emotions they attach to their perspective, without immediately judging it against your own.
And when you achieve that level of listening, Covey says you unlock synergy. You achieve a win-win state where 1 + 1 = 3. You take your differing perspective, combine it with their differing perspective, and create a third, better alternative that neither of you could have generated alone.
But there is a massive biological hurdle here. Empathic listening requires vulnerability.
Right.
How do we actually establish enough initial comfort and psychological safety with someone to get them to open up to that level of deep communication? Well, the brain has a built-in shortcut for this.
Let's talk about the shortcut.
So the brain's primary directive is survival, which means its default state in any social interaction is threat detection. To bypass the amygdala's threat response, the brain uses the similarity attraction principle, or SAP.
SAP.
Right. On a subconscious evolutionary level, the brain equates familiarity with safety. We naturally gravitate toward and trust people who are similar to us. People who look like us, speak our language, share our mannerisms, or hold our core values.
Okay, the research sources highlighted a fascinating, almost comical example of this. The beard study.
Oh, I love this stuff.
It's so good. So behavioral scientists ran an experiment showing that if you are a man with a beard and a complete stranger who also has a beard approaches you on the street to ask for a favor, like, borrowing your phone or asking for money, you are subconsciously much more likely to comply with that request than if a clean-shaven person asked you the exact same thing.
It's crazy. Your brain registers the physical similarity, the facial hair, as a tribal marker. It bypasses the threat filter and says, he is like me, therefore he is part of my tribe, he is safe.
But wait, let me push back on this heavily. If our brains are biologically wired by the SAP to only bond with people who are exactly like us, aren't we just justifying the creation of massive social echo chambers?
That's a valid concern.
I mean, if I only trust people with my exact educational background, my exact political views, or my exact facial hair, how does that fit with Covey's mandate to seek first to understand? If I'm only talking to my clones, there is no synergy. There is just an endless loop of repetition.
Right. And that is the exact trap most people fall into. But it highlights a crucial distinction in how we use this psychology. The similarity attraction principle should never be the end of your social interaction. It is merely the tool you use to initiate it.
Okay, so it's a starting point.
Exactly. It is a biological hack to lower the drawbridge so you can safely cross the moat.
Ah, I see. Because if you approach someone who holds a vastly different perspective than you, and you immediately lead with your radical differences, their psychological defenses will instantly raise.
Their RAS will filter your words as an attack.
But if you can find just one genuine point of similarity, like a shared frustration about a software system at work, a mutual hobby, even a similar sense of humor about a mundane situation, you trigger the SAP.
Yes, you establish a baseline of comfort and rapport. You essentially prove you are not a threat. And once those defenses are lowered, then you pivot to Covey's empathic listening.
You use the surface similarity to build the bridge, allowing you to safely walk across it and explore their deeper, uncommon thoughts.
And it is vital that the similarity is genuine here. We aren't talking about mirroring or artificially mimicking someone's behavior, which is highly manipulative and honestly often associated with psychopathic traits. It is about actively searching for real common ground as a foundation for safety.
That translates perfectly into step 3 of our checklist, the empathetic anchor. In your interactions today, especially with difficult people, find one genuine point of similarity to build comfort and bypass their threat detection. Then, and this is the hard part, stop talking.
Yes, stop talking.
Put away your ego, stop reloading your counter-arguments, and use empathic listening to truly understand their frame of reference.
Well, then find the common ground so you can safely listen to the uncommon thoughts.
That works beautifully in a healthy environment. But what happens when empathic listening just isn't enough?
Because they aren't being honest.
Right. Empathic listening operates on the assumption that the person you're communicating with is presenting their true self. What happens when the person sitting across from you is lying? And not just actively deceiving you, but what if they are lying to themselves?
Now we are entering the territory where standard communication frameworks break down, and we have to rely on deeper psychological dissection. We are opening up Friedrich Nietzsche's guide to reading people.
This is where it gets dark, but so useful.
Yeah, Nietzsche's philosophy argues that almost all the communication we've discussed so far is happening on the surface of an armor that everyone is wearing.
This is truth number 1 from the Thinksy breakdown of Nietzsche's 18 psychological truths. From a very young age, society trains us to trust words. We evaluate people based on what they say. But Nietzsche warns that people rarely speak from an objective truth.
No, they speak from a desperate need for survival, from fragile egos, and from fear. Everyone wears a mask to survive society.
And we shouldn't view the existence of the mask as a malicious insult, right?
Not at all. It is a necessary defense mechanism. To survive the brutal judgments of the world, children learn to create a curated version of themselves that they hope will be accepted, loved, or at least left alone. And they carry that mask into adulthood. But masks are heavy, and they aren't perfect. They slip.
Nietzsche points out that tension is where the mask slips. You don't read a person by listening to their carefully rehearsed speeches. You read them by watching for what makes them uncomfortable.
Right. A sudden flash of rigidity in the shoulders, a nervous laugh that totally doesn't match the severity of the words being spoken, or a rapid defensive change of subject when a specific topic is breached.
That physical tension is the seam of the mask carrying. It is where the real person begins.
And the most terrifying aspect of this, which is detailed in Truth 5, is the depth of self-deception. People don't lie to you first. They lie to themselves to keep functioning in a painful world.
Give me an example of that in the workplace.
Well, when a coworker insists, I am completely fine with not getting that promotion, I didn't really want it anyway, While their jaw is clenched tight and their tone is entirely flat,
Yeah.
they aren't necessarily trying to deceive you maliciously.
Right, they aren't scheming.
No, they have just rehearsed the lie so intensely to protect their own ego that they have actually convinced themselves it is true.
They're just managing their own cognitive dissonance, which leads us into one of Nietzsche's sharpest and, frankly, most uncomfortable insights, Truths 2 and 8, which deal with the psychology of projection.
Oh, projection is huge.
The concept is that what someone vehemently hates in others reveals exactly what they are hiding in themselves.
We despise in others what we are terrified to admit exists within us. Judgment is almost never an objective assessment of the target. It is a subconscious confession about the speaker.
The psychological sources provide brilliant workplace and social examples of this. Consider the person in your office who is constantly mocking others for being arrogant or show-offs. They police everyone else's confidence. Invariably, that person is deeply insecure about their own self-worth.
Or the person who ruthlessly mocks someone for being too emotional or sensitive. They aren't actually offended by the tears. They are terrified of their own suppressed feelings and lack the emotional regulation to handle vulnerability.
So if you want to accurately read someone, do not just look at what they praise. Trace their harshest criticisms back to their origin. What specific part of themselves are they trying to disown by attacking it in someone else?
They are projecting their own shadow onto you so they can safely hate it from a distance.
It's like they're shining a blinding spotlight on someone else's flaw, specifically so you won't notice they're standing in the dark holding the exact same flaw.
That's a great way to picture it. And this deception extends beyond criticism. It actually corrupts virtue as well. Truth 4 warns that excessive virtue is very often disguised vanity. Nietzsche called this the will to power.
Right. True morality doesn't demand an audience.
Exactly. But consider the person who loudly and constantly proclaims their own purity, the one who is obsessively correcting the moral failings of everyone around them on the internet or in the office. For them, morality has completely ceased to be about goodness.
It has become a mask for superiority. It is a weapon used to dominate others.
The louder the virtue signal, the more likely there is a dark, unaddressed shadow hiding behind it.
Which directly connects to truths 9 and 10 regarding false confidence and exaggeration. The sources make a brilliant point of the phrase, "I don't care what anyone thinks about me."
Oh yeah, anyone who feels the need to announce that they don't care what people think actually cares deeply.
Yes, exaggeration is just the ego's attempt to drown out its own doubt. It is volume used to silence insecurity.
Similarly, chronic false confidence hides deep guilt or fear. When someone performs absolute certainty-like, they are always perfectly composed, they over-prepare obsessively for minor meetings, they refuse to ever admit a lack of knowledge, they are terrified of being truly seen, they are burying a vulnerability.
Which culminates in truths 11 and 12, the desperate desire for control and the loud performance. We all know people who micromanage everything. They seek absolute dictatorial control over their environment, their projects, and their partners.
And we often mistake that behavior for strength or leadership. But Nietzsche argues they aren't strong at all. They are terrified of their own inner chaos.
The outer world must be obsessively managed because their internal emotional world is completely disordered and frightening to them.
And the loud performance is arguably the most relevant truth for our modern era of social media. Truth 12 states that the louder the performance, the emptier the core.
The endless curation of an identity, the constant updates proving how happy they are, the perfectly staged photos.
Nietzsche would view that entire apparatus as pure desperation. It is a whisper of deep need. A person who truly knows themselves, who is genuinely content, does not require a constant audience to feel whole.
So, bringing this back to your daily interactions, reading people isn't about learning parlor tricks to manipulate them. It's about seeing the fragile humanity beneath the armor. This is step 4 of our checklist, the mask check.
The mask check.
As you navigate your social interactions today, do not just blindly accept the words being spoken. Look for the physical tension. Notice the volume of their exaggerations, and fundamentally recognize that their harshest, most disproportionate criticisms of others are actually quiet confessions about their own insecurities.
But, seeing the mask raises a profound ethical and psychological question. Once you recognize the false confidence, the frantic micromanagement, or the cruel projection, what do you do with that data?
Right. Do you use it to judge them? Or do you attempt to understand why they had to forge such a heavy mask in the first place?
We have to trace the behavior back to its origin. We cannot stop at observation. We must move to understanding. We are looking at the roots of behavior, trauma, parentification, and true empathy. Because nobody wakes up as a child wanting to become an insecure, projecting micromanager.
No one. Nietzsche's Truths 13 and 17 capture this perfectly. No one speaks from pure logic. They speak from an emotional wound.
We love to believe we are rational creatures debating facts, but our logic is almost always a post hoc justification for an emotional reflex.
People do not act out their stated beliefs. They subconsciously reenact the roles they were forced to play as children to survive their family dynamics.
One of the sources phrased it brilliantly. Behavior is just a biography written in real time.
Every toxic trait is a historical record of a wound. This is where the clinical psychology from the Psychology Simplified source intersects powerfully with Nietzsche's philosophy. They dive into the developmental concept of parentified child, the child who grew up too fast. Let's unpack this because it's so common.
It is devastatingly common. Parentification is a widely praised psychological trauma. It occurs when a child is forced to take on adult responsibilities far before their brain is developmentally ready to handle them.
And this can take different forms.
Right, yeah, it can be practical responsibility, like raising younger siblings because the parents are absent or working constantly. Or it can be emotional responsibility, where the child becomes the therapist and emotional confidant for an unstable parent.
It's the kid who every adult praises for being so mature for their age.
Exactly. Society praises it because it makes the adults' lives easier. But clinically, it is a trauma response. A child has a developmental need for play, for safety, and for the freedom to be vulnerable and make mistakes. The parentified child was robbed of that environment.
They learned very early that they were not allowed to have needs.
Right. And when that child becomes an adult, the symptoms are profound and often debilitating. They suffer from chronic emotional burnout, severe people-pleasing tendencies, a complete inability to trust others to help them, and they suppress their own emotions because their childhood script taught them. My feelings are a burden to others. My only value is in what I can manage, fix, and provide.
Man. So when you are at work and you see an adult who is hyper-independent, someone who refuses to delegate and refuses to ask for help, even when they're clearly drowning in tasks, you aren't looking at a model of strength or dedication.
No, you are looking at a child who learned very early on that relying on others is dangerous because the adults who are supposed to protect them failed to do so.
The behavior looks entirely irrational until you understand the biography.
It's like getting angry at an adult for hoarding canned food in their pantry, obsessively storing away more than they could ever eat. It looks crazy until you realize they grew up in a war zone, survived a famine, and went starving for years.
Right. Once you know the history, the hoarding isn't crazy. It's a perfectly logical survival mechanism that simply outlived the threat.
That analogy perfectly illustrates how we need to view negative social traits. The adult who constantly interrupts and never listens. They were likely the child who was never heard, the adult who is completely emotionally detached and hyperlogical. They were likely punished or shamed for expressing emotions when they were vulnerable.
The sources map out two other manifestations of childhood wounds that dictate adult behavior. Truth 15 points out that chasing attention is often a disguised fear of being forgotten.
Yeah, the person in the meeting who desperately needs to be the center of attention, who completely dominates the conversation, isn't necessarily vain. They are terrified of being invisible, perhaps because they were entirely ignored by their caregivers when they needed love the most.
And Truth 16 deals with the dark nature of envy. Attacking successful people isn't actually hate. Envy is unspoken desire mixed with the agonizing pain of lost potential.
When someone ruthlessly tears down a colleague who is free, confident, or successful, they're actually looking at a part of themselves they had to abandon to survive. It physically hurts them to see someone else embodying the freedom they were never allowed to have.
Understanding all of this, seeing the terrified wounded child pulling the levers behind the adult mask demands an incredible amount of empathy. It requires us to look at difficult people through a lens of profound grace.
It does. But we have to introduce a massive caveat here.
Yes, this is so important.
Having grace for someone's inner child and understanding exactly why they wear a toxic mask does not mean you have to let them ruin your productivity, your career, or your mental health.
This is the most crucial balance you will strike in your daily life. Empathy without boundaries is just self-destruction. We cannot let our understanding of their trauma become an excuse for their abuse.
Absolutely not.
We have to learn how to handle toxic interactions, which leads us to the insights from criminal psychology and relationship research, specifically the work of JCS Criminal Psychology and Dr. Anna.
The scariest insight from these sources is why highly manipulative, narcissistic, or emotionally abusive individuals are so difficult to spot initially. We expect monsters to look like monsters, but manipulators survive because they often appear incredibly nice.
It's the classic true crime cliché. He was such a great guy, always quiet, always polite.
The nice persona is a cultivated camouflage. But Nietzsche's Truth 14 provides the exact tool we need to pierce that camouflage. How someone reacts to weakness reveals their true power.
Let's break that down. A manipulator can easily fake being nice to their boss or charming on a first date because there is an immediate power dynamic where they have something to gain. They are performing for a reward.
But if you want to see the real person, watch how they treat someone who has absolutely no power to fight back or offer them a reward.
Watch how they treat a waiter who accidentally brings the wrong order. Watch how they treat a junior employee who makes an honest mistake.
And most importantly, watch how they react to your own vulnerability. True strength is revealed through restraint. If a person subtly mocks your vulnerability, or if they punish honest mistakes with disproportionate rage, the mask is slipping. The nice persona is revealed to be nothing more than a tool used for control and extraction.
And we deal with this in everyday life. You might not be dealing with a criminal mastermind, but you might have a highly toxic manager or a partner who has quit the relationship but sticks around just to drain your emotional energy. How do we protect ourselves when we can't immediately escape them?
We apply interrogation psychology.
I love this part.
When a forensic psychologist is locked in an interrogation room with a narcissist or a highly manipulative suspect, they employ a tactic called emotional compartmentalization, mixed with tactical empathy. The suspect will inevitably attack, project, and attempt to gaslight the interrogator to regain control of the room.
Right, and the amateur interrogator gets angry, gets defensive, and tries to argue the facts, which means they have just handed control of their emotions over to the suspect.
They get tangled in the web.
Exactly. But the expert interrogator maintains a completely flat emotional baseline. They do not personalize the attack, they observe the pattern.
Right. If the suspect throws a tantrum, the interrogator thinks, truth 11, they fear inner chaos, they are projecting. By mentally labeling the tactic, the interrogator strips the attack of its emotional payload. They understand the mechanism which protects their own emotional core.
You stop being a sponge that absorbs their toxic energy, and you become a mirror that simply reflects their behavior back to them as data. You offer grace from a safe distance. You say to yourself, I understand that your childhood trauma makes you act this way, but I will not allow you to speak to me like that.
You can understand someone perfectly, you can feel deep sorrow for the wounds they carry, and you can still choose to build a reinforced steel wall between them and your peace of mind.
Which brings us to our final step. Step 5 of the checklist, the compassionate boundary. You use your knowledge of masks and trauma to offer silent grace to the wounded child inside the difficult person. But you use your proactivity looping all the way back to Covey's Habit 1 to set a firm, unyielding boundary against their toxic behaviors. You maintain your emotional baseline.
You do not let their unresolved history dictate your present reality.
If you can master that balanced empathy paired with absolute firmness, you become virtually untouchable in social dynamics.
You really do?
We have covered a massive amount of psychological terrain today. We've navigated from the biological filtering of our own brain stems to the philosophical depths of human trauma and deception. Let's seamlessly recap this 5-step checklist so you can begin applying it the moment this deep dive ends.
Step 1. The proactive prime. Take control of your reticular activating system. Consciously define the opportunities you are looking for today and actively reject the nocebo effect of assuming the day will be a disaster.
Step 2. The 20% target. Apply the 80-20 rule to your messy task list. Identify the specific high-leverage goals that actually drive results and consciously reset your productivity anchor away from your most exhausted, crisis-driven days.
Step 3. The empathetic anchor. When navigating social friction, find one genuine point of similarity to bypass the brain's threat detection. Establish comfort, then use the highest form of empathic listening to truly understand their frame of reference.
Step 4. The mask check. Look past the rehearsed words. Watch for the physical tension of the mask slipping. Recognize that extreme judgments are actually projections, and see the deep insecurity hiding behind loud, boastful performances.
And finally, step 5, the compassionate boundary. Understand the childhood wounds and parentification that drive toxic behavior. Offer their inner child grace, but use interrogation psychology to maintain an emotional distance, protecting your time and energy with absolute firmness.
If you execute those 5 steps, you aren't just rearranging the items on your to-do list. You are operating on a completely different level of psychological awareness. You are actually looking under the hood and fixing the engine rather than just waxing the paint on the sports car.
But before we let you go, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Throughout this entire deep dive, we've focused heavily on reading other people's masks, analyzing other people's projections, and protecting yourself from other people's trauma.
Yeah, we have. But Nietzsche's 18th truth brings all of this right back to the mirror. It states that all patterns are a confession. Every repeated behavior is a subconscious admission of an internal truth, and that rule does not exempt you.
As you go through your day-to-day, applying this checklist and analyzing the behaviors of the people around you, we want you to ask yourself a highly uncomfortable question. What mask are you wearing right now to survive your environment?
And what unhealed childhood wound is secretly writing your daily to-do list? We'll let you sit with that one. See you next time.